Have you ever seen someone sitting alone on a bench, wearing a wedding dress with no groom in sight, and wondered, what happened to her? What if I told you a struggling single father, the kind who fixes engines better than he fixes his own, heart, took that bride home not out of pity, but out of something deeper? This is a story about second chances, about a boy who rarely spoke, a woman who had forgotten how to hope, and a house that never stopped waiting for its missing piece. It's quiet, it's tender, and it just might remind you that sometimes the best kind of love doesn't begin with fireworks, but with a porch light that never goes out. So if stories like this speak to your heart, the kind that heal, that linger, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new chapter in our collection of true-to-the-heart tales. Now, settle in, because this story, it begins with a man, a little boy, and a bride who never made it to the altar. A struggling single dad took a bride home from a wedding. She never had, she changed his son's life. The morning sun filtered through the dusty window panes of Walker's Auto Repair, casting a golden hue on rusted tools and half-finished engines. Tom Walker wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve and leaned over the hood of a 2003 Ford pickup that had seen better days. The clink of metal and the occasional low hum of country radio were the only sounds in the shop, until the bell over the front door jingled softly, then stopped, unanswered. No one came in. Tom glanced up, then shrugged. Probably a breeze. In this small Montana town, nothing moved fast. Life here ticked by at the pace of creaking porch swings and coffee refills in chipped diner mugs. He checked his watch. Nearly 3:30, time to close up and pick up Ben from school. Tom washed his hands at the old utility sink, dried them on a rag, and reached for his flannel jacket. As always, he hesitated for a moment in front of the photo taped to his locker. It had yellowed with time, but the smile was still bright, Rebecca holding a newborn Ben, both faces radiant. Tom ran a finger down the edge of the picture, then turned away before the weight in his chest could settle too deep. The school sat at the edge of town, a low, red-brick building with a faded American flag flapping out front. Tom parked his old truck in the pickup line and waited. Children spilled out of the front doors in waves, laughing and shouting, swinging backpacks like they didn't weigh a thing. Ben was last, as usual. The boy moved slowly, clutching a sketch pad to his chest. His thin frame was wrapped in a jacket one size too big, and his dark brown hair fell over his eyes in a way that made him seem smaller than he was. "Hey, bud," Tom greeted as Ben climbed into the passenger seat. Ben nodded, but said nothing. Tom had long stopped expecting words. His son spoke, just not often, not easily, not since the hospital, not since Rebecca. Still, Tom talked to him like everything was normal, because sometimes pretending helped. "Doris brought by some of her apple pie this morning," he said as he pulled out of the school lot. "I saved the last slice for you." Ben's lips twitched, almost a smile. Almost. Their house sat on the outskirts of town, beyond the last gas station, and down a gravel road where mailboxes leaned like tired old men. It was a plain, two-bedroom home with peeling paint and a front porch swing that groaned when the wind blew. Ben went straight to his room. Tom started dinner. Grilled cheese, tomato soup from a can, and half a mind wondering if that check from Mike's transmission would ever clear. He set the plates down at the table. "Dinner's ready." Ben appeared, sketch pad still in hand. He always kept it close, like a shield. They ate in mostly silence. Ben dipped his sandwich in the soup and stared at the window. "What did you draw today?" Tom asked gently. Ben hesitated, then turned the pad around. A robot stood on a cliff, one hand shielding its eyes, the other holding a small child's hand. Tom blinked. "Wow, that's something else, Ben. He looks like a protector." Ben didn't respond. but his shoulders relaxed slightly. That was enough for Tom. A good day. Later that night, after Ben had gone to bed, Tom sat in the garage with a mug of instant coffee, tinkering with an old carburetor. The radio played low, some forgotten 70s love ballad drifting through the space. This was his peace. Steel, grease, and the quiet hum of memory. Rebecca used to sit on that old stool in the corner, reading books aloud while he worked. Sometimes she'd sing along with the radio, off-key and full of joy. Tom closed his eyes and let the ache pass through him like a slow wave. Not drowning, not anymore, just drifting. Around midnight, Ben woke up crying. Tom rushed in, heart thudding. Hey, you're okay." Ben clung to him, shaking, not speaking, just the way he always did when the nightmares came. "I'm right here," Tom whispered, rubbing small circles on the boy's back. "I've got you." And in that moment, with the cold seeping through the old wooden floorboards and the wind rattling the windows, Tom realized something both comforting and terrifying. He was all Ben had. No one else was coming. No one else could fill the empty chair at the kitchen table. No one else could chase the shadows from his dreams. And maybe Tom wasn't enough. Maybe he didn't read the right books or say the right words or know how to fix a heart the way he could fix a carburetor. But he loved that boy more than his own breath. That had to count for something. He stayed with Ben until the boy's breathing steadied, until the tears dried. Then he stood up, quietly stepped out into the hallway and leaned against the wall. He stared out the window at the empty road, the quiet trees, and the stars above that never moved. Some nights he whispered a prayer. Not to change the past. Not anymore, just for someone to come along and remind Ben how to smile without pretending. He didn't know the prayer would be answered, and that it would arrive in the form of a girl in a white dress, sitting alone on a bench, waiting for a wedding that never came, but that was still one chapter away. Saturday mornings were quiet on the edge of town, and Tom liked them that way. No customers calling about brake pads or sputtering engines, no school drop-offs or awkward conversations with teachers who didn't quite know how to help a boy like Ben. Just stillness, and the slow creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. Tom stood in the hallway just outside the laundry room, holding a small wooden box in both hands. It had been tucked behind a shelf in the garage, forgotten under a pile of winter blankets and broken picture frames. He hadn't seen it in years. The box was worn, its edges rounded smooth with time. Rebecca's initials were carved lightly into the lid, R.A.W., Rebecca Ann Walker. Tom stared at those 3 letters, feeling like they belonged to another life. He carried the box into the living room and sat on the edge of the old corduroy sofa, the springs sighing beneath him. For a moment, he just held it. Then, slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside were memories that still had weight. A folded sonogram photo, a dried flower from their wedding bouquet, the hospital bracelet from Ben's birth, a note written in Rebecca's neat looping script. "If something ever happens, tell him I sang to him every night." Tom closed his eyes. He could still hear her voice, soft and a little off-key, humming lullabies while Ben kicked in her arms. The sound had faded over the years, but not the feeling. Never the feeling. A sharp knock at the door startled him. Tom quickly closed the box, setting it aside. Ben peeked around the corner, hair mussed from sleep, his sketchpad tucked under one arm like always. "Hey, kiddo," Tom said gently. "Did I wake you?" Ben shook his head, eyes flitting to the wooden box on the couch. Tom followed his gaze. He hesitated, then patted the cushion beside him. "Wanna sit?" Ben stepped into the room, cautious like a cat, and lowered himself beside his dad. He didn't say anything. He rarely did, but his eyes were curious. Tom opened the box again, slowly this time, letting Ben see. "This was your mom's," he said. "She kept little things in here, things that mattered." Ben leaned closer, his fingers brushing the edge of the hospital bracelet. Tom watched him, unsure of what to say next. The words felt fragile, But something in his son's stillness told him to keep going. "She used to hum to you before bed," Tom said, "even when you were still inside her belly. Said you always kicked when she hit the wrong note." Ben's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but something close. "After you were born, she'd rock you in that old chair in the corner and make up silly songs. I think half of them didn't even have words." Ben reached for the folded sonogram photo, studying it like it might come alive. "That's you," Tom said. "Just a little peanut back then. Kicked like a mule, though." Ben looked up, and for a split second his eyes weren't so guarded. Tom swallowed the lump in his throat. "You know," he added, "she would have loved to see your drawings. She always said you'd be a builder or an artist, or maybe both." Ben blinked fast and looked away. He closed the lid of the box carefully, as if tucking those memories back to sleep. Then, quietly, he slid the box into Tom's hands, stood up and walked to his room. Tom sat there for a long time after, the box warm on his lap. He didn't follow. Ben didn't like being chased. Instead, Tom let the silence settle, the way he always did. But something had shifted. Not much, just a hairline crack in the wall Ben kept up. But Tom had learned to recognize those. They meant hope. That afternoon, Tom went out back to patch the old fence that separated their yard from the woods. He liked the quiet work. Something about hammering nails and measuring boards steadied him. From the kitchen window, he caught sight of Ben at the table, sketching like he always did. But there was something different in his posture. Not slouched or hunched, focused, present. Tom smiled to himself and kept working. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the air cooled, Tom came inside to start dinner. He set the kettle on the stove and glanced toward Ben's pad, sitting open on the table. He wasn't one to pry, but this time he stepped closer. The page showed a drawing of a boy sitting beside a woman in a rocking chair. Her hair was long. There were music notes around her. The boy was smiling. Tom exhaled slowly, his hand resting on the back of the chair. When Ben emerged from his room a few minutes later, Tom said nothing, just slid a grilled cheese onto his plate and set a bowl of soup beside it. They ate in silence, as always, but something had changed. Ben reached for the ketchup, Rebecca's weird tradition, and poured it in a circle around his soup. Then he looked up. "She sang to me?" he asked. Tom looked at him, truly looked, and nodded. Every night Ben didn't say anything more. He didn't have to. That night, Tom stood at the door to Ben's room and watched his son sleep, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm. In the moonlight, the sketch pad lay beside the bed, open to a new drawing. A mechanic, a boy, and a woman. Sitting under the stars, Tom swallowed the emotion in his throat, stepped back and whispered into the hallway, "Thank you, Beck, wherever you are." And with that, he closed the door and let the quiet settle again. This time, it didn't feel so lonely. The air was crisp that Sunday afternoon, a quiet kind of cold that crept under coat collars and turned breath into wisps of silver. Tom drove with the window cracked just enough to let the scent of pine and wood smoke drift into the cab of the truck. The engine rumbled like an old dog, familiar and steady. Ben sat beside him, hands tucked in his jacket, sketchpad balanced on his knees. He hadn't drawn much that morning, just scribbled aimlessly, as if waiting for something to inspire him. They were heading back from the town supply store. Tom had picked up a new door hinge and a box of nails for the shed. It wasn't urgent work, nothing ever was around here, but keeping busy made the silence feel less heavy. As they rounded the bend past the old Methodist church, Tom spotted her. At first, she was just a shape, white against the dull grey of the bench beneath the bare oaks. But as the truck rolled closer, the shape sharpened into something out of place, a woman, alone, still. She sat rigid on the weathered bench, a bouquet of wilted roses dropped at her feet like fallen leaves, her white dress, unmistakably, a wedding. Gown pooled around her like spilled milk. The veil hung loosely from one shoulder, caught on the breeze but half forgotten. Tom slowed the truck. "What is it?" Ben asked, the rare question barely louder than a breath. Tom didn't answer right away. He pulled over to the side of the road, put the truck in park, and stared for a moment. There was something fragile about her, like a porcelain figure left in the rain. He turned to Ben. "Wait here, okay?" Ben nodded, eyes wide and watchful. Tom stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. As he approached the bench, the woman looked up. Her face was pale, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes. Not crying anymore. She'd already done that. This was the look of someone emptied out. "Ma'am," Tom said gently, "are you all right?" She didn't speak, only blinked once, as if unsure whether he was real. Tom knelt slightly so he wasn't towering over her. "Name's Tom. I don't mean to bother you, I don't see many brides out here alone." That earned him the ghost of a smile. Barely there, she glanced down at her dress, then back up. "I guess I'm not a bride anymore," she said, her voice hoarse but soft. "Not really?" Tom nodded slowly. "Want to talk about it?" She shook her head. "Not now." He stood, hands in his coat pockets, trying to gauge what to do next. She didn't look injured, but she looked lost and cold and alone in the kind of way that was dangerous, not for the body but for the heart. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. Her eyes flicked away, toward the church, then down the road. "I was supposed to be on a plane to Maui by now," she said quietly. "Now I can't even bring myself to call a cab." Tom followed her gaze. There were no cars, no waiting guests, no one searching for her. Just the fading light and a wind that cut sharper by the minute. "Well," he said finally, "I'm not much of a Maui kind of guy, but my house isn't far. Got heat, food, and my son just learned how to make microwave s'mores. That's something, right?" The woman looked at him for a long time, like she was deciding whether to laugh or fall apart. Then she blinked again. "You don't even know my name." Tom smiled softly. "That's true. But I know what it's like to sit alone when you thought someone would be there." She took a deep breath, her shoulders hitching. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Emily," she said. "My name's Emily." Tom offered a hand. "Come on, Emily. Let's get you out of this cold." Back at the truck, Ben sat perfectly still, eyes glued to the approaching figure. Tom opened the passenger door and gestured gently. "Ben, this is Miss Emily. She's going to ride with us for a bit." Ben didn't respond, but he didn't retreat either. That was something. Emily climbed in carefully, her dress bunching awkwardly. Tom handed her his jacket from the back seat, and she wrapped it around her like armor. No one spoke on the short drive home. The hum of the engine filled the silence, and Emily kept her gaze on the passing trees, the kind of stare that wasn't seeing but remembering. At the house, Tom helped Emily up the porch steps. The screen door creaked open, and the scent of wood polish and old books drifted out. "You can sit here," he said, guiding her to the couch. "I'll get you a blanket." Emily nodded, eyes darting to the family photos on the mantel, lingering. On one of a woman holding a baby, Rebecca and Ben, frozen in a happier time. Ben stood just outside the living room, watching. He didn't say a word, but his sketchpad was clutched tightly in both hands. Tom returned with a blanket and draped it over Emily's shoulders. "I'll make some tea," he said, moving toward the kitchen. "Or coffee, if that's more your style." "Tea's fine," she murmured. Ben moved a step closer. Emily looked at him, her expression softening. "Hi," she said gently. He stared for a moment, then looked down at the floor. But he didn't leave. That was more than Tom expected. In the kitchen, Tom stood at the kettle, listening to the muffled sounds behind him. Emily's voice, low and careful, Ben's footsteps crossing the floor. He wasn't sure what had brought her here, but he knew somehow this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The next morning brought a soft grey sky and a light drizzle that tapped gently against the windows like hesitant fingers. The kind of day that asked for quiet, no plans, no errands, just slow breathing and warm mugs. Tom stood at the stove, stirring scrambled eggs in a cast-iron skillet. The aroma of butter and pepper filled the kitchen, a familiar grounding scent. It wasn't much, but he believed breakfast, a real one, had a way of reminding people the world was still spinning. Behind him, Emily sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a flannel blanket that dwarfed her like a child playing dress-up. Her wedding dress, now carefully folded and tucked into a grocery bag, rested on the chair beside her. An odd, silent guest. She looked better in the morning light. Not cheerful, not quite rested, but real. No makeup, no veil, no performance. Just a woman trying to steady herself. Tom set a plate in front of her. Eggs, toast, a couple of strawberries he found in the back of the fridge. "I wasn't sure what you'd eat," he said. "This is perfect," Emily replied, her voice still soft but less shaky than the night before. Ben sat across from her, his sketchpad open, though his pencil hadn't moved since he took it out. He studied her quietly between glances at the page. Not suspicious, just curious. Emily gave him a small smile. "Is that your journal?" she asked. Ben looked at Tom, uncertain. "It's okay," Tom said. "You can show her if you want." "Two?" Ben hesitated, then tilted the pad so she could see. On the page was a new drawing, a girl sitting on a bench, her dress rippling like water. Her face was soft, peaceful, alone, but not sad. Emily blinked. "That's me, isn't it?" Ben nodded. Emily's eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears away quickly. "You made me look stronger than I felt." "That's how he sees people," Tom said, setting a mug of tea in front of her. "Draws them the way they ought to be, not just how they are." Emily reached out and tapped her fingers gently on the sketchpad. "He's got his mother's soul. I can tell." Tom stiffened slightly, but didn't speak. She noticed and drew back. "I'm sorry. That was too much." "No," Tom said after a pause. "It's okay. It's just not something people usually say." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just thoughtful, like all three were adjusting to the way the furniture had moved in their hearts. Later that morning, Tom called his neighbor Doris to let her know they had a guest. Doris had a reputation for two things: knowing everything before anyone else and making casseroles that could cure almost any emotional injury. Sure enough, by noon, a foil-covered dish arrived at the front porch with a note that read, "For your guest, no one eats heartbreak on an empty stomach." Tom chuckled as he set the casserole in the oven. Emily, now changed into a pair of jeans and a borrowed flannel shirt from Rebecca's old closet, helped fold laundry at the kitchen table. Her movements were slow but purposeful, like someone trying to re-enter the rhythm of life, one small act at a time. "You don't have to do that," Tom said, watching her stack Ben's shirts. "I know," she replied, "but I need to feel useful, like I didn't disappear." Tom nodded, understanding more than he could say. "How long were you engaged?" 3 years, Emily said, folding a sock in half. "Met him at a fundraiser in Chicago. He was charming, successful, said all the right things. But when things got real, he disappeared faster than the frosting on our engagement cake." She tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. "I'm sorry," Tom said. "I'm not," she said quickly, surprising herself. "I thought I would be. But what I feel most right now is embarrassed. Not because I lost him, because I almost married someone who never really saw me." Tom leaned against the counter. "I think a lot of people marry someone they only half know. You're brave to walk away before the ceremony instead of after the damage." Emily looked down at her. "Hands, it wasn't bravery. He left first." Tom said nothing, just gave her a nod that meant, "You're still standing. That counts for something." That evening, Emily offered to help with dinner again. Tom was hesitant, not because he doubted her, but because it had been years since someone. Besides, Ben had stirred a pot in his kitchen. She moved like she belonged, carefully, respectfully, but not like a stranger. Ben set the table. No one asked him to. He just did it. Over dinner, the three of them talked more than usual. Emily asked Ben about his favorite books, and he surprised everyone by naming a science fiction novel he'd read twice. He reads better than most. Adults, Tom said, a trace of pride in his voice. Ben flushed, eyes shining. Emily smiled. Smart and kind. That's a dangerous combination. After dinner, as dishes clinked in the sink and Tom dried the last plate, he glanced toward the living room. Ben had fallen asleep on the couch, sketchpad still resting on his chest, pencil loosely held in one hand. Emily stood in the doorway, watching. "He reminds me of someone," she said. Tom turned to her. "Who?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes were far away again. "Maybe I'll tell you another time." Tom didn't press. He was learning that some people don't open all at once. Some people arrive in pieces, and it's not about fixing them. It's about making space for them to rebuild. That night, as Tom lay in bed, he heard something soft from the hallway, humming, a quiet, broken lullaby. He stepped out and saw Emily sitting in the armchair near the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. Too many thoughts. He didn't ask what they were. Instead, he sat across from her, both of them looking out into the silence. For the first time in a long time, Tom didn't feel like he was carrying all the weight. Alone, and for the first time, Emily wasn't waiting for someone to rescue her. They were just two people sitting in the quiet, and that, somehow, felt like enough. By Wednesday, the air had shifted. Not quite spring, but the kind of late winter thaw that made the porch swing creak a little less like grief and a little more like memory. Tom noticed it when he stepped outside to grab the morning paper. The sky tinged with a hint of blue that had been absent for weeks. Inside, the house was quiet. That warm, layered kind of quiet only possible when something broken had started to breathe again. Emily was in the kitchen, humming under her breath, as she sliced carrots for stew. She'd found the tune on the radio the day before and had been humming it ever since, not quite in key, but confident enough not to care. Tom stood in the doorway, watching. There was something deeply human about the way she moved. Sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in focus. He hadn't realized how long it had been since someone else moved with intention in that kitchen. "You're up early," he said. Emily glanced back with a half smile. "Thought I'd try cooking something edible for dinner tonight," Tom chuckled. "You don't have to win Ben over with food. You drew him in the second you complimented his robot sketches." "Still," she said, tossing the carrots into a pot. "Every kid deserves a home-cooked meal that doesn't come out of a box." Tom hesitated. "You sure you're okay staying another night?" "I'd like to," she replied, not looking at him this time. "Just until I figure out the next step." He nodded. That sounded fair. That sounded reasonable. But there was a part of him, buried and quiet, that didn't want her to leave at all. That afternoon, Tom took Ben with him to the garage to finish some work on an old Chevy that had been sitting there since before Christmas. The boy stayed close as he always did, scribbling ideas in his sketchpad while Tom worked under the hood. "Miss Emily's cooking tonight," Tom said, glancing at Ben. "Stew, hope you're hungry." Ben looked up and nodded slowly. Then, after a pause, he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "She smiles different than most people." Tom blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" "She doesn't smile when she's happy," Ben said. "She smiles when she's trying not to cry." Tom swallowed hard, wiping his hands on a rag. His son didn't speak often, but when he did, it was like someone turned on the light in a dark room. "You think she's sad?" Tom asked. Ben nodded again, but not in a bad way. "It's like when you miss someone, but you still want to." "Be kind." Tom crouched beside him. You're a good kid, you know that, Ben shrugged. Mom used to smile like that too, before the hospital. Tom didn't speak for a moment, just reached over and gave Ben's shoulder a quiet squeeze. Dinner was served just after 6. The table had 3 places set, real cloth napkins, the good plates that only came out at Thanksgiving, and a small bouquet of dried wildflowers in a mason jar at the center. Emily's stew filled the house. With a rich, savory warmth, she ladled it into bowls with a touch of ceremony, clearly proud of her work, but too humble to admit it. Ben climbed into his chair and looked at the setting carefully, as though unsure if it was really for him. "It's okay to use the good stuff, right?" Emily asked, catching Tom's glance. Felt like a celebration. "Celebration of what?" Tom asked. She met his eyes. "Of not eating alone." Tom smiled. "Can't argue with that." For the first few minutes, no one said much. Just the clink of spoons and the soft whistle of wind outside the windows. Then, unexpectedly, Ben spoke. "It's really good," he said. Emily blinked. "Thank you. I mean it," Ben added. "Tastes like something from a storybook." She laughed, startled but genuine. "I'll take that as high praise." Tom watched them, watched how Emily's face softened, how Ben leaned in closer, how the air between them seemed to hold something delicate and new. Later, over second helpings and warm bread, Emily asked Ben what his favorite thing to draw was. "Machines," he said, "but ones that are also people, like protectors, guardians." Emily tilted her head. "Why do they have to be machines?" "Because machines don't get tired, they don't leave." The words fell into the silence like a stone into still water. Tom stiffened. He didn't look at Emily, but he felt her glance. Ben went back to eating like nothing had happened. Like he didn't just say something that cracked the room open. Emily didn't press. She just reached for her glass of water and nodded. Makes sense. Tom wanted to say something, anything to change the subject, but nothing came. So they sat in the truth for a while. Sometimes that's all you can do. After dinner, Emily washed the dishes while Tom dried. Ben had returned to his sketch pad, curled on the couch, pencil moving steadily. "You okay?" Tom asked quietly. Emily handed him a plate. "Yeah, just surprised." "By what?" "By how much this feels. Like a life." Tom glanced at her. "It is a life." "Not mine," she replied. "Not really, I'm just borrowing space." Tom paused, setting the dish towel down. "Emily, you're not a burden. You're not a stray someone brought home out of pity. You're here because we want you here. Ben wants you here." She looked at him then, really looked, and something behind her eyes shimmered. "I don't know how to be wanted without feeling like I have to earn it," she admitted. Tom's voice dropped to a gentle murmur. "You don't have to earn kindness. Sometimes it just comes without strings." A long pause. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, not breaking eye contact. "You're welcome." That night, after Ben had gone to bed, Tom found Emily sitting on the porch swing, a cup of tea cupped between her hands. The wind had died down, and stars blinked overhead like little reminders of something larger. He sat beside her, neither of them speaking right away. Then Emily said, "I was supposed to be in Maui right now, eating overpriced seafood and pretending not to feel alone on my honeymoon." Tom chuckled. "Well, we don't have coconut shrimp, but the casserole game in this town is strong." She laughed full this time. Then her expression softened. "Do you believe in second chances?" He thought for a long moment. "I believe in good people finding each other when they need it most," he said, "and in quiet things growing where the ground was once scorched." Emily looked at him, eyes glistening but steady. "I don't know what this is," she said, "but it's the first thing in a long time that doesn't feel like running." Tom nodded. "Then stay a while." "No. In promises, no pressure, just stay." And under the stars on that quiet porch, she whispered the first promise she could keep. "Okay." It started with a small, almost invisible gesture. A corner of a drawing slipped quietly onto the kitchen table one morning, not handed to her, not announced, just left there. Emily found it as she came downstairs, still tying the knot of her borrowed bathrobe, the smell of fresh coffee leading her like a trail of breadcrumbs to the kitchen. Ben's sketchbook was usually his sanctuary, closed tight and guarded like a treasure chest. But this page was different. It was meant to be seen. She sat down, brushing her fingers lightly across the paper. The drawing showed 3 figures standing under a large oak tree. A boy, a man, and a woman. The boy held a paper airplane. The man had a wrench in one hand, the other resting gently on the boy's shoulder. And the woman, she held nothing, just stood slightly apart from them, her hands open and empty, but her eyes looking toward the boy, warm and steady. Emily's throat tightened. She stared at the image for a long moment, then turned toward the hallway. Ben stood there, barefoot and still, watching her with quiet, cautious eyes. She smiled, holding up the drawing. "Is this us?" Ben didn't answer right away, but the hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then he gave a single, small nod. Emily rose from the table, walked over, and crouched gently to his height. "Thank you for letting me in," he shrugged a little, eyes darting to the floor. "I mean it," she said. "You don't let people close. I see that. But this means more than I can say." Ben looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't feel like a stranger." Emily blinked quickly, her heart catching in her chest. "You don't either." Later that day, while Tom was under the hood of a stubborn Buick out in the garage, Emily and Ben spent the afternoon planting bulbs in the backyard. It had been Emily's idea. She'd found a box of forgotten tulip bulbs in the shed, likely leftovers from some distant spring. No one expected them to bloom. That wasn't the point. They worked quietly at first. Ben dug the holes. Emily dropped the bulbs in and gently covered them with soil. "You ever plant anything before?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not really." "Well, here's the thing about tulips," she said, brushing dirt from her gloves. "You plant them when it's cold and ugly out, when nothing's blooming. But if you're patient, really patient, something beautiful shows up later, even when you forget you planted them." Ben paused, his small hands covered in earth, then nodded slowly. "Like magic," Emily smiled. "Exactly like that." In the evening, Tom came inside to find the kitchen windows steamed from something simmering on the stove and laughter drifting down the hallway. Not loud laughter, gentle, surprised like a bird testing its wings. He paused at the doorway to the living room. Ben and Emily were sitting on the floor, a stack of old board games between them. Monopoly pieces lay scattered like confetti. "I'm just saying," Emily said, mock serious. "You can't build a hotel on Baltic Avenue and expect to get rich." Ben grinned. "You're just mad because I beat you twice." Tom leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Should I be worried? My son is learning ruthless real estate strategy from a houseguest." Ben turned, eyes shining. "She's the one who taught me to mortgage the railroads." Emily held up her hands. "Guilty." Tom shook his head, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "Dinner's almost ready. You two should wash up." As they disappeared down the hallway, their footsteps light and echoing with something that felt suspiciously like joy. Tom stood alone in the living room, the Monopoly pieces still scattered across the rug. He looked down at the thimble token resting near his boot. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel like a place of missing things. It felt full, not with noise, but with presence. That night, after Ben had gone to bed, Emily lingered at the kitchen table while Tom rinsed dishes in the sink. "I think he's starting to trust me," she said, her tone soft, almost tentative. Tom turned off the tap, dried his hands, and joined her at the table. "Yeah, I noticed. That's not easy for him." "It's not easy for me either." Emily admitted. But with Ben, it doesn't feel forced. It feels like he sees things most adults overlook. Tom nodded slowly. He does. Sometimes I wonder if he sees too much. There was a pause. Then Emily said something she hadn't said aloud since the day her world cracked open. I lost a baby 2 years ago. Tom looked up, heart stilling. He didn't speak. He knew better than to fill silence that wasn't his to break. It was early, she continued. Not many people knew. We hadn't even told our families yet. And when I miscarried, it felt like I lost the part of me that knew how to hope. Her voice trembled, but she pressed on. After that, everything got quieter. My fiancé stopped talking about kids. We stopped talking about anything. I kept pretending I was okay because I thought that's what strong women do. Smile. Push. Forward. Get to the altar. Tom reached across the table, not to hold her hand. He didn't want to overstep, but to set his fingers near hers, close enough for her to feel. You don't have to pretend here, he said. Emily looked at him, eyes shimmering. Ben gave me something I thought I'd never feel again. Tom's voice was barely above a whisper. What's that? She smiled. Not the kind that covered pain, but the kind that cracked it open and let the light in. Purpose. Later, Tom stood at Ben's bedroom door, watching the boys sleep. His sketchpad lay open on the nightstand, a new drawing already taking shape. A woman planting something under a cloudy sky, her hands covered in soil, her face lifted toward the light. Downstairs, Emily sat in the armchair by the window, staring. Into the dark, a cup of tea nestled between her palms. Outside, the tulip bulbs rested beneath the soil, waiting, like all beautiful things that bloom only after the world has forgotten they're there. The snow returned on a Tuesday. It wasn't the kind of snow that buried streets or knocked down power lines, just a quiet dusting, like the world had exhaled gently and left a thin layer of forgiveness over everything. The rooftops wore white, the fields shimmered, and the porch swing held a fragile crown of frost. Emily watched it from the living room window, a cup of coffee warm in her hands. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, still as glass, taking it in. Behind her, Ben sat on the floor, cross-legged, flipping through a worn book of constellations that had belonged to his mother. Every few minutes he'd glance up at Emily, as if checking to make sure she hadn't disappeared. She never noticed. But Tom did. That afternoon, Emily found herself in the small guest room again, the one with faded yellow walls and a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. She'd been sleeping there for nearly a week now, and while she hadn't brought more than a bag of clothes and a phone charger, the space had started to feel held. She opened the closet to hang up the sweater Doris had loaned her, and when she saw it, tucked in the corner beneath a box of Christmas ornaments, a toy, small, soft, clearly handmade, a stuffed rabbit with a fraying ear and a stitched smile. It looked loved. She picked it up gently, cradling it in both hands, a whisper of something caught in her chest. Memory, ache, a sensation too big to name and too old to forget. Before she realized it, she was sitting on the floor, the rabbit still, in her lap, her fingers tracing the seams like they held some kind of prayer. She didn't cry, not right away. That came later, when she tucked the rabbit carefully back where she found it and closed the closet door with trembling fingers. Downstairs, Ben was drawing again. He sat at the kitchen table, tongue slightly sticking out in concentration, the way he always did when something mattered. Emily moved carefully, not wanting to disturb him, but he looked up before she could pass. "You can sit," he said. It was permission. A simple, monumental invitation. She pulled out the chair across from him. "What are you working on?" Ben slid the paper toward her. "It's kind of a dream, or maybe a wish." The drawing was of a small house on a hill. Smoke curled from the chimney, and in the front yard stood a garden with 3 people, A man holding a rake, a woman watering flowers, and a child chasing butterflies. Emily studied it closely. "It's beautiful." Ben shrugged. "I like drawing things that feel safe." She smiled, but her heart ached. "And does this feel safe to you?" Ben nodded, then looked her in the eyes, direct, fearless. "You feel like home, not like a place, like the feeling." The words unraveled something inside her. No one had ever said that to her, not even the man she almost married. Later that day, while Tom was out replacing brake pads on Mrs. Cafferty's ancient Ford, Emily and Ben baked cookies. It was her idea, though the recipe was half-invented, and the kitchen quickly turned into a flower-snowed battlefield. Ben giggled as she tried, and failed, to crack an egg one-handed like she'd seen on a cooking show. "You're terrible." "At this," he teased. "Terribly determined," she corrected, laughing as yolk dripped onto the counter. Tom walked in just as they were pulling the first tray out of the oven. He stopped in the doorway, inhaling the smell of vanilla and cinnamon. For a moment he didn't say anything, just stood there, coat still on, hat in hand, as if unsure whether he was allowed to belong to a moment like this. Emily looked up. "We saved you the best batch, slightly overbaked, mildly misshapen, but made with reckless amounts of love." Tom smirked, shaking snow from his shoulders. "Sounds like my kind of cookie." Ben handed him one, still warm. Tom bit into it and gave a theatrical sigh. "Dangerously edible." They all laughed, and it felt easy, uncomplicated, like a memory, being made in real time. That night, after Ben went to bed, after the kitchen was clean and the leftover cookies were wrapped in foil, Emily sat by the fire, nursing a cup of chamomile tea. Tom joined her, carrying 2 logs to toss into the stove. For a while neither spoke. The flames crackled gently, casting golden shadows that danced along the hardwood floor. Then Emily said, "I lost a little girl." Tom looked over, his face still. "She was barely formed," Emily continued, staring into the fire. 8 weeks, not even a heartbeat strong enough to hold on to. But she was mine, and when I lost her, it felt like I lost the version of me who might have been a mother. She didn't cry this time. The tears had already come and gone. What remained was quieter, something settled and raw. "I named her in my mind," she added. "Sophie, never told anyone that." Tom swallowed, throat tight. "You would have been a good mother," he said. Emily smiled, tears clinging to her lashes. "How would you know?" "Because I watch you with my son," he replied. "And I see him reach for you in ways he hasn't reached for anyone since Rebecca." Emily turned toward him. "That doesn't scare you?" "It humbles me," Tom said, "that he's letting someone in again, that he chose you." Her eyes shimmered again. "I didn't come here looking for this. I didn't think you did." "I still don't know what this is." He didn't answer right away, just looked at her, steady and kind. "You don't have to name it yet." She exhaled, long, slow, letting go of something she hadn't realized she was still holding. Tom leaned forward and added another log to the fire. The warmth pulsed outward, filling the room, touching the corners that had long been cold. Emily curled her knees beneath her and closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to feel. Upstairs, Ben sat at his desk, pencil in hand, drawing by, the soft light of his bedside lamp. He sketched a garden again, but this time the woman in the drawing held a small child in her arms. Just a suggestion of form, a promise not yet realized. He titled the page in the corner, "If She'd Stayed." Then, after a pause, he scratched it out and wrote instead, "If She Stays." The snow had melted by morning, leaving the yard soggy and glittering with sun-touched dew. A warm breeze rustled the dry branches of the elm tree in the backyard, as if spring were beginning to loosen winter's stubborn fingers. Tom was in the garage, fixing a stubborn generator. The old thing coughed, sputtered, then reluctantly growled to life. He grinned, satisfied, wiping his hands on a rag before heading inside to wash up. The house was quiet. Ben was at school, and Emily had offered to reorganize the old bookshelf. In the living room, an excuse, really, to touch something familiar and bring a little order to the chaos inside her. Tom paused at the doorway, watching her from behind. She stood on her tiptoes, trying to reach the top shelf, hair tucked behind one ear, the sunlight catching the soft curve of her jaw. It was the kind of moment he'd forgotten how to notice, ordinary and breathtaking all at once. "You're going to pull something," he said with a smile. Emily turned, laughing lightly. "And ruin my dramatic reach-for-the-stars pose?" He walked in, brushing dust off a stack of books. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," she said simply, her gaze drifting over the spines of old paperbacks and family photo albums. Tom froze for a beat as she reached for one of the albums, not because he didn't want her to see, but because he hadn't opened them in so long. He wasn't sure what memories might fall out. Emily sat on the floor with the book in her lap, flipping through pages filled with the faded joy of summers. Past, Rebecca holding Ben at the beach, Tom carving pumpkins in the driveway, their small world once wrapped in warmth. Then she turned the page, and there it was. A candid photo. Rebecca sitting in a cafe, laughing mid-sentence, a coffee cup in one hand. Across from her, Emily, the moment held like a fragile breath between them. Tom sat down slowly, a crease forming between his brows. Emily traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. "I was wondering when I'd see this again." "You knew." "Rebecca?" Tom's voice was low, measured, as though trying to catch up with something he didn't see coming. Emily closed the album gently, holding it in her lap. "We met in college. She was 2 years ahead of me. We weren't close at first. I was quiet, always in the library. But she had a way of noticing people who felt invisible." Tom stared at her. "She never mentioned you." Emily smiled sadly. "She did, but probably not in the way you'd remember. I moved to Chicago after college. We lost touch after she married. But before that, she talked about you like you were made of sunlight and sawdust." She looked down. "She said you had the kindest hands." Tom's throat tightened. "I didn't know she was gone," Emily added. "Not until I saw her photo on the mantel that first night. I didn't say anything because I didn't know how." He nodded slowly. "You've been carrying that all this time?" She met his gaze. "I didn't come here because of her. I didn't know this was you, I swear. But once I realized, it felt like someone had tied a string from her to me, and it led me right back here." Tom leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I was afraid it would change how you saw me," she said. "I thought maybe I didn't deserve this kindness, not if it was built on coincidence." He exhaled deeply, eyes drifting to the photo. "I don't believe in coincidence, not anymore." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't hard or heavy. It was filled with the ache of understanding. "I've been angry with her," Tom said after a moment. "Not for dying, for leaving, for not preparing me for what would come after. The silence, the emptiness, the fear I'd mess Ben up." Emily's voice was gentle. "You didn't mess him up. You kept him whole." He looked at her, eyes soft. "You think so? I see the way he looks at you, Tom, like you're the anchor that keeps his world from drifting." She paused. "And I see the way he's beginning to look at me, like maybe I might be a part of that world too." Tom didn't move, but something in his chest cracked open just a little. "I think she'd be grateful," Emily whispered, "that Ben has someone who speaks his quiet language, and that you're not alone anymore." Tom swallowed hard, blinking against the emotion building in his throat. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For telling me the truth, for carrying her memory with care." he smiled faintly, and for not burning the stew the other night. Emily laughed, the sound unburdened and honest. They sat there for a while, the album still resting in her lap, the past and the present folding into each other like pages of the same story. That evening, after Ben came home from school, Tom told him about Emily's connection to Rebecca. They sat at the table together, no distractions, no rush, and he kept it simple, honest, like all important things should be. Ben was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Did Mommy like her?" Tom looked at Emily, then back at Ben. "She did, very much." Ben looked at Emily, expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he stood and walked to his room. Emily's heart sank, but a moment later he returned. With his sketch pad, he opened it to the drawing of the garden, the one he'd shown her before, and handed it to her. "I want to add a swing to the tree," he said, "but I don't know how to draw it right." Emily took the pad gently, eyes misting. "I can help you with that." He nodded, then leaned his head lightly against her shoulder. Tom watched them, something settling deep inside him. A quiet truth that didn't need to be named. They weren't fixing anything. They were becoming something new. That night, after the dishes were done and the fire burned low, Emily stood at the window in the guest room, holding the photograph of her and Rebecca. She pressed her fingers to it, as if tracing the outline of a blessing she never expected to receive. "Thank you," she whispered into the night. "I didn't know where to go, but I think you did." And somewhere in the stillness, in the hush of a house slowly healing, it felt like someone was listening. The sky was pale with early morning light when Tom entered the kitchen, the wooden floor cool beneath his bare feet. The kettle hadn't been boiled yet, the house was still wrapped in sleep. But something felt off. Then he saw it. A folded piece of paper on the kitchen table, resting beside Emily's favorite mug, the one she'd chosen from the back of the cabinet because it was chipped and, in her words, still worth holding on to. Tom knew. Before he touched it, before he read a word, he knew. The quiet had changed. He pulled out the chair and sat down, the note trembling slightly in his hands. Her handwriting was small, careful, honest. "Tom, I don't have the right words, but I owe you some kind of goodbye. You've given me more grace than I deserved, a warm place when I was cold, a second chance at breathing when I didn't think I could take another step. Ben, he's changed me in ways I didn't think possible. He reminded me what it feels like to matter, to be seen, to be needed, not for what I can do, but simply for being present. But I need to go, not because I don't care, but because I do. This house, this life, it's sacred. And I came into it, carrying pieces of a past I haven't finished putting down. I need to find out who I am outside of what broke me. I need to be whole before I can ask to stay. If there's a place for me when I come back, I hope you'll leave the porch light on. Tell Ben he's a masterpiece. Tell him I'll carry his drawings with me wherever I go. Love, Emily." Tom read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and set it back down beside the mug. The house, once silent, now felt louder with absence. He didn't cry, but he sat at that table until the sun fully rose, and the hum of the world outside reminded him life would move forward, whether he was ready or not. Ben noticed right away. He came downstairs rubbing his eyes, wearing the sweatshirt Emily had fixed for him after it tore near the sleeve. He looked at the empty chair, then the mug, then at Tom. "Is she gone?" he asked, voice small. Tom nodded. "She left a letter." Ben didn't ask to read it. He just pulled out the chair where Emily usually sat and climbed into it like he was filling a space that wasn't ready to be empty. Tom slid him a bowl of cereal and poured milk over it without speaking. They ate in silence, the kind that pressed against the walls, wanting to be filled but not ready to be broken. That afternoon, Tom cleaned the guest room. Not out of anger, not out of grief, just out of habit. He folded the blanket she'd used, placed her forgotten hairbrush on the dresser, and paused when he noticed something tucked behind the nightstand. A drawing, one of Ben's. It showed a woman standing at a crossroads. One path led into a forest. The other, back toward a small house with smoke curling from the chimney. Above her head, a single line of text. Sometimes you have to leave to remember what home feels like. Tom traced the edge of the page, then leaned against the doorframe and exhaled. She hadn't meant to hurt them. He knew that, but knowing didn't soften the sharpness of missing someone who had become part of your everyday without you even realizing it. The days that followed fell into a rhythm, quiet, functional. Meals were made. Ben went to school. Tom fixed a water heater and rotated tires and pretended he didn't look at the mailbox any differently. But it was Ben who changed the most. He didn't talk about Emily, not directly, but he started drawing differently. Less machinery, more people. One day, he showed Tom a sketch of a boy standing at the edge of a garden. The tulips they'd planted peeked out from the soil, half real, half imagined. "Do you think they'll bloom?" Ben asked. Tom looked at the paper, then at his son. "Yeah, I think they will." Ben nodded and tucked the drawing away without saying anything else. A week later, Tom stood at the hardware store counter buying a new lock for the back shed. The cashier, an older man named Harry, leaned over and said, "Hey, you all right, Tom? Haven't seen you with that lady lately." Tom offered a thin smile. "She's away for a while." Harry nodded slowly. "Well, she seemed like someone who made the place feel warmer. Hope she finds her way back." Tom did too. That night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Ben crawled into bed early. Tom lingered in the doorway, unsure if he should say something. "Dad?" Ben asked, his voice muffled under the quilt. "Yeah, buddy. She'll come back, I think." Tom crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed. "What makes you say that?" Ben shrugged. "Because I miss her. And she said people don't leave things they miss forever." Tom smiled, brushing his son's hair back. "You're a wise kid." Ben yawned. "She smiled different the last night she was here." Tom blinked. "How so?" "It wasn't the sad kind," Ben murmured. "It was like she remembered something." Tom sat with him until his breathing slowed, his chest rising and falling like a tide finding its rhythm. Then he went downstairs and left the porch light on. Some nights he sat out there alone, listening to the wind, a mug of tea cooling in his hands. Sometimes he brought a blanket, sometimes just the silence. He didn't wait like a man counting days. He waited like a man who knew healing didn't follow a clock. And in his chest, something had settled, not bitterness, not even hope, just space. Space for her if she came back. Space for something beautiful if she didn't. In her absence, Emily's presence lingered in small ways. The way Ben asked for extra cinnamon in his oatmeal, the way the porch swing creaked in the early morning sun, the way the tulip bulbs slept quietly beneath the dirt, waiting. Tom tended to the garden every few days, gently, without expectation. He didn't press the soil or dig to check. He just watered, trusted, waited, like the rest of him. The first bloom came quietly. It wasn't grand, just the soft green tip of a tulip leaf pushing through the thawed earth beneath the kitchen window. But to Tom, it was a revelation, a silent signal, a whisper of return. He stood there with his morning coffee, watching it sway slightly in the breeze. After all these weeks, something planted in hope had remembered how to rise. Ben padded into the kitchen, hair tousled, sleep still clinging to his eyes. He poured himself a glass of orange juice and joined Tom by the window. "Is that the one we planted by the birdbath?" he asked. Tom nodded. "Looks like it." Ben pressed his hand against the glass. "She said tulips are like promises, that even if it takes a while, they show up." Tom glanced down at his son. "Do you think she'll show up too?" Ben didn't answer right away, then softly, "I think she's growing too, like the flowers, just not where we can see yet." Tom reached over and gently ruffled his son's hair. "I think you're right." The days unfolded gently after. That, marked by routine and small signs of spring. Ben was talking more. Not a lot, not all at once, but enough that his teacher at school had pulled Tom aside to say, "Whatever's happening at home, keep doing it. He's starting to shine." Tom smiled at the compliment, but deep down, he knew it wasn't something he was doing. It was the afterglow of someone who had left a handprint on their lives. Emily's departure hadn't closed a door. It had opened something else, something quiet, reflective, and still unfolding. One afternoon, while cleaning out the shed, Tom found the cardboard box where Emily had tucked away the wedding dress. It was sealed shut, labeled only with her name in small, neat handwriting. He stood with his hand resting on it for a long while, unsure what to do. Part of him wanted to bury it somewhere, to forget the sight of her sitting in that dress on the roadside bench. But another part, the part that remembered her laugh in the kitchen and the way she knelt in the garden beside Ben, told him to keep it just as she left it, not as a weight, as a placeholder, a mark in the story where something unfinished waited to be continued. That evening, Ben brought home a crumpled paper from school, a poem he had written during free period. Tom unfolded it carefully, eyes scanning the uneven penciled lines. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. A house that waits. There is a house with room to grow, where tulips sleep beneath the snow. A boy draws dreams, a dad stays strong, and something missed still hums a song. The porch light's on, the windows clear. The house still hopes you'll come back here. Tom's throat tightened as he read the last line again. He looked at his son, who stood watching with careful eyes. "Did you show this to your teacher?" Ben shook his head. "It's not for school." "Who's it for?" Tom asked. Ben shrugged, but his voice was steady. "For her, in case she's still listening." Tom folded the poem and tucked it into his wallet. "I think she is." Sunday came with soft wind, and the kind of sun that made you forget winter had ever settled in. Tom sat on the porch swing, a book in his lap, though he wasn't really reading. He watched the road, not constantly, but enough. Out of habit more than hope, Ben was in the yard with a handful of sidewalk chalk, drawing galaxies along the cracked cement walkway. There was peace in it, a kind of peace Tom hadn't known he was still allowed to feel. He glanced up as the wind shifted, just in time to see something flutter along the edge of the garden. A flash of blue fabric, hair pulled into a loose braid. He blinked for a heartbeat. He thought he was imagining her, but then Emily stepped fully into view. She didn't walk fast. She didn't smile right away. She just came down the gravel road like someone who wasn't sure if the world would still welcome her. Ben stood up first. The chalk slipped from his hand. He stared at her, frozen. Emily paused a few feet away, unsure. "Hi," she said. The boy ran. He didn't yell or cry. He just ran straight into her, arms flinging around her waist like he was reclaiming something that had been missing from his very center. Emily knelt to catch him, tears already in her eyes. "I missed you," he whispered. "I missed you too." Tom rose from the swing, heart pounding, not with surprise but with something quieter, relief. She looked up at him over Ben's shoulder. "I didn't know if I could come back," she said. "But I couldn't stay away." Tom nodded, voice thick. "You didn't have to be ready, just willing." Emily stood slowly, still holding Ben's hand. "I still have work to do. I'm still not everything I want to be." Tom stepped forward. "None of us are, but we're not meant to do it alone." She smiled then, not the brave, brittle smile of the woman who first showed up at his door, but something softer, deeper. Ben tugged her hand. "I saved your garden spot." She laughed gently. "I hope the tulips didn't give up on me." "They didn't," Tom said. "We didn't either." That evening, the three of them sat on the porch together. No fanfare, no explanations, just warm mugs, tired shoulders, and the sound of springbirds returning home. Tom looked out at the garden, the tulips pushing higher with every passing hour. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked quietly. Emily thought for a long time before answering. "No," she said, "but I remembered what I already had." Ben leaned his head against her arm. "And Tom?" Tom didn't say a word. He just reached across and turned on the porch light. Though the sky hadn't yet darkened, some lights weren't about seeing, they were about being seen. Spring came early that year, the kind of spring that snuck in softly, brushing the world awake one green blade at a time. Tulips bloomed beneath the kitchen window, their petals unfolding like a long-held breath. The air smelled of damp soil and distant honeysuckle, and the porch swing no longer creaked with sorrow, only rhythm. Tom stood at the stove one Saturday morning, flipping pancakes while Ben sat at the table, brow furrowed in concentration over a new drawing. Across the kitchen, Emily leaned against the doorframe, still in her slippers, her hair pulled into a loose braid, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug, the same one she'd left behind the morning she disappeared. She hadn't asked for her old room back. She hadn't needed to. She never really left it. They hadn't had a long talk about what her return meant. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic promises whispered under the stars. What came back wasn't the ceremony of love. It was the practice of it, folding laundry, sharing silence, laughing at burnt toast, and that was enough. Ben held up his sketchpad just as Tom flipped the last pancake onto the plate. "I finished it," he said. Emily walked over, peeking over his shoulder. It was a garden scene again, but different. This time, more alive. The colors richer, the lines bolder. Three figures stood in the sunlight, the boy, the man, and the woman. The woman wasn't standing off to the side anymore. She knelt in the soil, laughing, her hands dirty from planting. The man leaned down beside her, a watering can in one hand, and the boy, he held a tulip, blooming wide in his palm. At the bottom, Ben had written, "Home isn't a place. It's the people who wait for you with the light still on." Emily's eyes brimmed. "You're going to make me cry again." Ben shrugged. "You always say tears are good when they water something." Tom chuckled and placed the pancakes on the table. "Well, we're all about to get watered over breakfast, apparently." They sat together, just the three of them, and passed. Syrup and laughter across the table, like it had always been theirs to share. That afternoon, they visited Rebecca's grave. It was Ben's idea. He held Emily's hand the whole way there, quiet but not solemn. Just steady. Tom brought a single tulip from the yard, a deep orange one Rebecca would have loved. The cemetery sat just beyond the edge of town, tucked between a grove of trees and a worn wooden fence that leaned like it had stories to tell. They stood together, the three of them, in front of the stone-marked Rebecca Ann Walker, beloved wife and mother. Tom cleared his throat. "I think you'd like her," he said aloud, eyes on the stone. "Actually, I know you would." Emily reached down and laid the tulip at the base of the marker. "I'm not here to replace anyone," she whispered, "just to honor what was and help grow what comes next." Ben didn't say anything, but he knelt and placed his drawing, a small copy he'd made, next to the flower. Then he stood and took both their hands. That evening, Emily cooked dinner. Tomato soup and grilled cheese, Ben's favorite. The kitchen smelled like memory, but it wasn't heavy. It was warm, familiar. Tom stood at the counter slicing apples when he looked over and said, almost casually, "You know you can stay, right?" Emily turned from the stove, her hand still on the pot handle. He continued, "Not out of pity. Not because Ben needs you, not even because I do." He paused. but because you belong, and I think maybe you've known that for a while now." Emily didn't speak right away. Her eyes were full, but her smile was clear. "I was waiting for someone to say it out loud," she said, "but I stopped needing them to." She turned off the stove and crossed the room to him, slipping her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his shoulder. "I'm home," she whispered. He didn't say welcome back, he just held her, like you do with something precious you thought you'd lost. Later, they sat on the porch swing as dusk settled gently around them. Ben played in the yard, barefoot and chasing fireflies, his laughter echoing across the lawn. Emily leaned her head against Tom's shoulder. "I never imagined this," she said. This kind of ending," Tom smiled. "That's the thing, Em, it's not an ending." She looked up at him. He nodded toward the yard. "It's a beginning. One we didn't plan, but maybe the best ones are the ones that catch us off guard." The porch light blinked on automatically as night fell. They both watched it. "I used to think healing was about forgetting," Emily murmured, "or replacing, but now I think it's just making room." Tom squeezed her hand. "There's always room." Ben came bounding up the steps, breathless, cheeks flushed with joy. "Can we make s'mores tomorrow?" he asked. "Breakfast, lunch, and dinner," Tom replied. Emily laughed. "Don't you dare promise that unless you're prepared to deliver." Ben leaned against her, fitting perfectly into the crook of her side. "I'm glad you came back." "I'm glad you let me," she said. He tilted his head. "You're not going anywhere now, right?" Emily looked to Tom, then to the yard, the swing, the stars just beginning to appear. "No, sweetheart," she said. "I'm right where I belong." Inside, the house exhaled, not with sorrow, not with ghosts, but with life. The wedding dress still sat in its box in the back of the closet, untouched, unrevisited, and yet no longer symbolic of what was lost. Instead, it had become a symbol of what could change, of what could heal. No ceremony had been planned, no announcements made, but a new family had been built, not in vows spoken under stained glass, but in choices made in silence, in laughter shared over dishes, in patience during grief. The porch light stayed on, not because anyone was missing anymore, but because it had become a tradition, a sign to the world that someone was always welcome, that this house, this life, this love, it had room for new beginnings, for old wounds, for tulips, and for anyone still brave enough to come home. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what part of this story touched you the most? Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Reading your reflections is one of the best parts of what we do here. And if stories like this bring you comfort, hope, or just a quiet moment in your day, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There's always a seat here for you and new stories waiting just around the corner. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Until next time, take care, keep the porch light on, and never stop believing in second chances.